unless you're an accountant, you probably hate accounts. I trained as an accountant and I can't actually say it's my favorite thing to do. So I'll be brutally honest there. And the reason this was a topic that I thought would be really useful to businesses in the UK and beyond, is because marketing and sales and kind of doing that ROI, we've been through the startup, having no money for this kind of stuff, journey ourselves. We've been going 15 years now. We started in 2006, and the landscape of what was possible in 2006 is very different to what it is today in 2021. So it's always fascinated me how we approach marketing, how we make it work for us. And obviously FreshBooks have got some fantastic marketing, and I've managed to press gang Paul into sharing his knowledge and expertise with us all. So I basically just bullied him into being here. So I will introduce Paul. Please do introduce yourself.
Awesome. The arm was twisted hard. I love
It was.
I love talking. I love talking about marketing and especially the whole notion of doing it scrappy and what are some of the kind of tips and tricks. I've spent my career either at like large companies or small companies or doing my own thing. So I've like sold kid toys. I've consulted with like big brands globally, like Diageo and AB InBev. I sold cell phones to kids here in Canada and working at a carrier, but I've also been on the other side where I've been like consultant, and I've been running my own business and having to build my own pipeline and do my own BD, and I've consulted for small organizations or SaaS startups and stuff. I started a food company when a bunch of money was going into food tech, and starting a fairly local brand here in Toronto, Canada, where I am. So I've kind of run the gamut. Now I'm here at FreshBooks, running marketing here, and we're kind of interesting. We're a Toronto-based company in Canada, but we're obviously trying to acquire companies globally, and we're competing with fairly large companies like Intuit, which is QuickBooks, and their budget eclipses ours by a fairly large degree. So it's one of those things where no matter what your size is, you always have to kind of keep being scrappy and keep thinking about different ways you can outflank or out-strategize your competitors.
Yeah, I think that's a really good intro. We'll kind of dive straight in. And please do, everybody, if you've got questions along the way, pop them into the chat. I'm sure Francisco will pull them out for us later. I'm in Swansea in Wales in the UK, so I really enjoyed some of the pronunciation of the British place names, and Cheltenham was my favourite one. So whoever it was who's in Cheltenham, that's how we say it. Yeah, so we'll dive straight in then, into how, if you've been a business startup and money's tight and you can barely afford to pay yourself, you're really dealing with a shoestring budget. And it always really used to frustrate me when you'd speak to consultants, or we started the business, it was 2006, and then 2008 the credit crunch happened, and you get all these consultants and everyone going, oh, the last thing you want to do is slash your marketing budget. Oh, that's great, I understand why, but we're really up against it here. So we've always been, like you said, Paul, scrappy. We've been quite scrappy. We love that kind of David versus Goliath journey. What we classifying here as a shoestring, what can be done on a shoestring? Let's say you've got no more than, I don't know, I mean, we had nothing. We had like a couple of £100 a month to market with. What can you do? How can you get your message out there? What are some kind of practical tips and tricks that you can do to get your voice out there, get your brand out there, and get people buying when you just haven't got the kind of, the deep pockets of some of the competitors?
Sure. So I think like the first thing is it's always going to be dependent on the type of the business that you are. So if you're like a service-based business that is providing consulting services, or if you're like a tradesperson or something of that effect, where you're kind of focused in a specific area, the number one place that drives activity is referrals. So it's like, so how can you really activate your network, and within your network to help drive that kind of referral activity. So that's like the number one thing. It's easy to say, it's really hard to do. So I think, like, when I was doing consulting activity, the one area that I always focused on was to make sure I carved out 20% of my time to always focus on BD and pipeline generation, or just like any kind of new business generation. So I was like very kind of old school, hitting the street, talking to people, and just figuring out how I could build up my business. But if you're in a different area, let's say if you're in e-commerce, or even like if you're slightly larger, then it may be that you want to be doing things like focusing on social channels like Facebook or Instagram and stuff. I think that the one great thing about the marketing today is, in years ago, in the 90s, 2000s, awareness and being able to build global reach was only limited to like a certain select group of companies, who had big global budgets and could buy things that had global reach. But now with all of the social channels and digital buying platforms and things like that exist, anybody can really find their niche target anywhere in the world. So I think it's really about like figuring out those ways that or the places that your customers are at, and then being able to build programs and tests to be able to find them.
Yeah, I would say that when we started in 2006, I remember the first website we had, and someone said to us like, "Oh, it's accountancy services, so your website's really just like an online brochure for what you do." And now it's this kind of marketing funnel. And I think that obviously the way that the world has changed, really offers us so many more opportunities. What you said there about kind of social media and things, obviously you can't really you can't manufacture a true viral video, because it's always really obvious when a company does it and they try and go viral, and it looks really cheesy. But you can
I
use
have
it
a
to.
question.
Oh
When you
yeah.
had your limited budgets, what was the first marketing tactic that you guys had that got you your first kind of group of customers?
Oh, yeah, great question. So what you said about referrals, super important. We went networking. So we went to networking events and met with, other small businesses. And I suppose it's kind of like an in real life, an IRL version of the internet, in that we had to just, we couldn't go to a chat room, Facebook group. That's really old.
Yeah.
No one goes to chat rooms anymore. Just fire up MSN, and MySpace. No, but we went to physical events and we met people and we swapped cards, and then we spoke to them afterwards, and then we asked them for referrals. So we said, look, we've been doing business for a couple of months now. If you like what we do, can you introduce a friend, please? And you know what? Very rarely, in fact, I don't think I ever got the response of no, I'm not going to do that, because people will introduce if you ask. The other thing we did, which really worked, was to collect business cards and details where we'd met people, and then follow up with, I suppose, what you'd call lumpy mail nowadays. So follow up with something interesting to send them. So many years ago, we made these little mailers called it was called How to Grow Your Own Accountant, and they were like a little brown envelope, and we had a kind of a picture of like an old school accountant with a kind of calculator on it. And it was kind of like a joke, like, here's some seeds, plant it in an account and grow. And we just sent it to people we'd met, like physically at networking events. So it wasn't high cost, but it kind of got us remembered. It kind of made people go, oh, okay, yeah, no, I remember them, and got those conversations going. So that was probably kind of how we started. And you know what? It was probably where my fascination with marketing and messaging came from, and how to attract attention. It's sort of somewhat in my blood to want to be the center of attention constantly, and marketing's, I suppose, a way to kind of live that through my company. So that's kind of where it came from. But social media wasn't there, and it's both incredible and terrifying, actually, the amount of information you can get about your target market. So back in 2006, I'd have to find out what kind of person was going to this event, and then try and go to events where I thought that sort of person go. Now it's all in there. It's all in social media. You can sort by age and location and geography and interests and other groups they're a part of. So I suppose if you are on a shoestring budget, you can be really hyper specific.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable. Like the when you're talking about getting to events and collecting like cards and contact information and stuff. I think one of the biggest challenges that people make is like they underestimate the amount of work that's required to start to build up build up your activity, build up your BD kind of pipeline, and make sure that you have stuff going, and just like how much you need to go and put into to start getting that momentum. But once it starts going, you're always surprised where things come from. It's interesting because FreshBooks has that when it was an early stage kind of company, it did some tactics that I've done at other places where it's like you go to the places where your customers are at, but you may not be able to afford it. So how do you do the guerrilla kind of style things around the event, knowing what your customers or what your potential prospects might be into? So I remember when I was at a SaaS startup in the late 2000s, and we were in the social media technology space. So we had like posting management, measurement, ad solutions. It was kind of, like, so solutions help you post up to many social media channels and buy ads and stuff. And so we didn't have the big budgets of some of the other big SaaS companies and stuff, but we wanted to go to places like South by Southwest down in Austin, where all of the big brands and tech companies were. And so we kind of fell backwards into a great idea where we had a van where we had brought everybody down, and one night it's really hard to get restaurant reservations and stuff, and this was kind of like pre-Uber days and stuff, so it was hard to get taxis and stuff in Austin. And so one day we were leaving a restaurant where we had hosted a bunch of existing customers and then some other folks. And so we were in a van, like this big extended van with like 4 rows of seats in it. And there was a bunch of people at the side of the road. And so they couldn't get a cab. They're kind of off, like they had come from this barbecue place. And so we picked them up, and they were a bunch of people from the Microsoft marketing team. And
Wow.
so they got in, we're like, oh, hey, and we're chatting with them. And so we drove them to like a party that they were going to. And we went in with them because they're like, oh, come into the party. And then they introduced a bunch of people. We actually closed some business with them. So they began, it was months down the road, but we actually signed on as a client. But it was funny because then we said, hey, I think we're onto something. And so then what we did with the van was, instead of using it to shuttle us places, we just like we were driving around Austin at night, just kind of picking people up and driving them places so that we could meet other folks and solving kind of like a pain point that people had at the actual festival.
That's brilliant. That's absolutely amazing. So you basically sort of started a free taxi service in order to get contacts.
Exactly.
That's amazing. Just for the record, like I live in Swansea. We don't have Uber here, so no one can get a cab around here either. Sorry to any Swansea cab companies, but no, I love that kind of guerrilla marketing. I think that being on a shoot again, it can seem so daunting. So when you, especially when you're new, or you've got a product or service that you really believe in, like I know this is solving a problem, and I know that if I could tell 1 million people about it, that X number of those people would sign up, and I know this in my heart of hearts. But you look at who's out there and the budget is spent, or even if you're just looking at kind of pay-per-click advertising, you look at the keywords you're trying to bid on, and you're talking kind of 30, 40, 50 pounds just for a click, and you're like, that's like, if 4 clicks could wipe out my whole budget. But that concept of being inventive and then seeing opportunities, and that's what the whole premise of being a startup is, right? It's seeing an opportunity nobody else saw and kind of taking advantage of it. And I think actually in many ways it's kind of more fun to to be a startup and have that shoestring budget, because it sort of forces the creativity. You know, your necessity being the mother of all invention. You're kind of forced to think outside the box. It's really easy to get lazy with marketing budgets when you've got a lot of budget, right? Like it's easy to overspend.
Yeah, it is so easy to just hit people over the head. And
Yeah.
when I was, and I also think like the days of that are limited too,
Yeah.
or they're over anyway. Like big brand budgets are a wonderful thing. When I was at a telco or a wireless company here during the explosive growth, we spent gobs of money on awareness. We were always focused on results, so it wasn't like we just cared like about driving awareness and stuff. But we ran massive quarterly campaigns with budgets upwards of 10 million US, and so in terms of running each campaign, and so we were spending upwards of well into the six figure, or like 120 million ish in terms of total marketing budget, and that's like a good amount of money to be able to drive whatever kind of message that you want. But when you
Yeah.
get into like trying to do other things, this is where I think these social channels have been able to build and will continue to be able to build brands differently. I think they're great even tools to use to test
Yeah.
ideas, to validate whether your ideas are right or wrong. Like to be able to build a landing page, a bunch of ads on Facebook and Instagram, and be able to run it, to be able to validate a concept is hugely valuable.
Yeah.
I was working with a friend of mine's company who he ultimately sold it to Shutterstock, and I was doing some consulting with them, and so he was doing custom photography and imagery for brands, and so they were targeting large brands or small, kind of mid-market ones as well, and it'd been huge growth within 2 years. And when I was working with them, I was helping, drive their pipeline and get sales leads to their sales organization, and doing your standard kind of B2B mix of like, content ads and things. And so one thing that I kept seeing was, I'm like, you from a product standpoint, you guys aren't doing video. And it's like, video seems to be a big thing. He's like, we've perfected photography, and to be able to then like, uh, create the system to be able to brief in our contributor network and all this stuff for video is just going to be too tough, even though like there's a big market need for it. So what I went and built a website, bought a domain. It was called BotReel. It doesn't exist now because I just shut it down because I was paying for it still. But it's like made some ads, built the site, and just did a bunch of lead gen ads. So I spent $2,000 of my own cash at the time, and said, "Look at this! Like I was able to generate a bunch of leads for this site for video services. So pay me back." But I'm giving you like the idea, like you need to go and do this because there's massive market demand for it.
Yeah.
So it's kind of good to be able to use these different types of tools, because like to your point, the targeting exists. It can be cost effective to do it. Just like put the constraints and just make sure that you're focused on what you're doing.
Yeah, I think that brings onto a really important point about the importance of really targeting who you're going for. We talked about if you've got a lot of budget, how easy it is to waste by hitting people over the head. If you're throwing that net out really wide, yeah, fine, if you've got the money to kind of to throw at that, so be it. But most companies, if I'd argue that even big companies don't want to be wasting money on anything,
Yeah.
they want to make sure they're getting the return. So I suppose the first step to making sure that your marketing returns for you, regardless of the size of your budget, is really targeting who it is that you want to talk to. It's something that I think that because of necessity at Mazuma, we've always been quite good at. We know exactly who our target market is. We know them inside out. We know how they think. And even within that, our target market, there are different sorts of people who will respond to different messages in different ways. But if you're just starting out, how on earth do you go and get that information? How do you find out how to talk to your market? Because they may not think or act like you because you started a business, so you probably think slightly different to maybe your market does. How do you go about getting that information in the first place?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. There's either like a couple different kinds of companies. So there's companies that have started because someone has recognized a pain within a market, and it's their lived experience.
Yeah.
And so they know the target audience because they are the target audience. And
Yeah.
that's the best situation to be in.
Yeah.
It like, you know who you're targeting, you know all the pain points, you can look inwardly. And honestly, that's how FreshBooks started. Mike, our founder, he started out because he overwrote an invoice when he was in a web design consulting business, and then he's like, hey, there has to be a better solution or tools, and no tools existed to be able to do invoicing in any kind of scalable way through any kind of cloud software. And so very early on built out and started building out this category. So there's that piece. And I think that's where those are the greatest places to start from, because then you just look inward and your gut will tell you and lead you in the right direction. Then there's other kinds of businesses. Like when I got into the food business, I was not a foodie. I got in because I thought, hey, this is going to be an interesting technology exercise, but I eat, so I kind of know the target audience. I have lunch every day. So what we had built was it was all app based, so it was vertical. We had kitchens within an urban center, and then a delivery fleet on bikes, as well as electric cars, and they all had inventory on them, so you could order from your phone, and then we would get someone your food within under 10 minutes, delivered to the base of your door. So it was all high quality chef made lunches, and we focused on that like 2 hours, you know. And so, I'm like, who is our audience, and how do we really kind of get to know them? And for me, it's just like constantly be in front of your audiences, or who you think is your audience, and talk to them. So what we did, it was funny because it became one of our best growth hacks. Was we would go into organizations and feed them, make them download our app, and give them a coupon code. So we got all their information, and they were loaded into our CRM, and so we could constantly communicate to them and get them to repeat order. So our cost was very minimal from a marketing standpoint. We just worked our networks, and then those people then recommended us to go into other organizations. So every lunch hour, we would have like 4 or 5 teams go out within the city and go to these like office towers and where it was a lot of density, and then just continually get people loaded onto our platform. And so then our job wasn't the first order; our job was the second order. And so, but it was just understanding, like, what is it? What are the pain points? Like, all of the things that we entered with were like, they really care about food quality and making sure that that like our entire supply chain was clean. And it came down to, they didn't care about that. What they wanted was a certain price point with a certain taste profile. And so we're like, yeah, we can actually slip a little on like the quality. It doesn't have to be, and then work our cogs so that we can make our unit economics look a little bit better. But it was just, you constantly got to be talking to your customers.
Yeah, Joe, that's really interesting. We've actually very recently done a piece of research because, again, even if you've spoken to your customers once, obviously the world changes. We've seen that obviously a huge change in the last 18 months, and you need to keep engaging with your customers or your target customers. You also, if you're attracting the wrong sorts of customers, the ones you don't want to be working with, then they're not going to tell you what you need to know. But yeah, we did a piece of research very recently where my assumption about this specific type of client was they were very price driven, and actually they weren't at all. It was like bottom of their list, top of their list was peace of mind. I was like, well, that's, to me, we'd put a bunch of time into really how to dress up a price increase, or how to dress up, well, it really is good value for money because of XYZ. They didn't really care about that. They just wanted it handled. So that was, and this is after I've been working in my own company for 15 years now, and even that was surprising to me. So yeah, it's really important to kind of, like what you said, they didn't care as much about food quality as you thought they did. They probably do care about it, but it wasn't like number one. It was kind of maybe 4 or 5 or 6 down the list of things they care about. So when we talk about then, being, I suppose one way to make sure you're kind of returning on what you do with marketing is to be kind of hyper focused on your customer, and really only marketing to your customer. and I suppose it's quite a good position to be in. You go through a cycle. We certainly did, in that when we were kind of testing our marketing out, we get the right customers in, but also some of the wrong customers would come in, and then we turn them away. We go, no, not a good fit. You sort of know when your marketing's working, when you're only attracting in the right sort of customers, and then you kind of repeat it. But in terms of the ROI, so making sure you're getting the right customers in, it's all well and good getting the right customer in to sell them a £3 product, but if it's costing you £500 to get each of those customers in and they only buy it once, that's not an ROI. You very quickly, you're going to run out of cash and customers. So like, how do you guarantee this, and how do you also then, if you have like a one-time purchase type deal, or a once every kind of however many years type deal, how do you get more business out of that, especially if your product's so good that you only have to sell it once? What do you do after that?
Yeah, you really hope you have some line extensions to kind of
Right.
continue to sell on. It's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think first it's like, I think where everybody starts and where you need to start is like, build a model. Like you have to sit down and spend some time in Excel or a sheet and make a bunch of assumptions. And then you have to know that all of those assumptions are not going to be true, but it has to start with like making sure you've got goals, making sure you've got targets, making sure that you know how much you're willing to spend on someone, on those assumptions of what they're going to bring back in terms of value. And then it becomes in a area of vicious experimentation. In every place that I've been, I love hanging out in either Excel or Google Sheets and making assumptions, and then seeing how close, and when you're close, it's like incredibly gratifying. But then where you're wildly off, and just what the challenges were, and also like when it's not working, how to cut. And so, when the example of the food place I was at, I'm like, within a year and a half, we were, or within the first 6 months we had launched, we're up and going. We're doing like on a monthly basis, we're doing, just over $1 million in revenue a month. But we needed to be at 2.1 to be at scale and to be moving where we needed to go. And so when we weren't hitting it, and when we kept trying different things, we kept trying different activities, but the unit economics weren't working, we knew that we had to cut and pivot and try a different model to help drive some other things. So I think the first thing is like making sure know your numbers and know what you're willing to spend, and know how all this stuff is tracking, so that you can know when to shift. But then when this area of constant experimentation, it's I think all companies need to be doing this. So when I did some consulting work for one of the box mattress companies, and they had built a great marketing machine using Facebook and Google, so AdWords, SEM, and Facebook ads. And but they couldn't get beyond that. So it's like they'd optimized, they had the perfect, they knew their cost of acquisition, they knew what they were going to spend. Someone only bought a mattress every 7 years, so it's like once they're in the door, maybe you get someone buying for a second property, but that's not going to be the core of what it is that you're selling. So it was like, how do they expand their universe? And so we had to make some big bets on doing things like buying some outdoor and some transit ads. And then we threw coupon codes on there. We tried to negotiate as hard as we could to make sure that the cost made sense. And it ended up working. So it was one of those things where it was a bit of a big gamble. It wasn't massive, like it wasn't going to hurt the company if it didn't work, but it then was like, great, now we can do this, and what's the next step and the next step. So I think it's one of those things where you have to constantly be exploring different areas and different options.
Yeah, I think something I've definitely learned over the years as well, and this is partly my own ego, is to not be too much in love with your own ideas. You could have what you think is a great idea, and you're determined it's going to work, and you're desperate to get it out there, and you spend ages on it, and out it goes, and it doesn't perform, and then it's really easy to fall into that kind of sunk cost fallacy trap. Well, I've already spent this amount of money on it, I'm not gonna let it fail now. That's a really hard thing to let go of when you're marketing, is to not waste that.
And it's interesting too, because it's like, you know when that you need to let go, but it's also if you know that something should work, what is it that's not working, and then getting
Yeah.
into those root causes of why. I
Yeah.
mean, when I joined FreshBooks, I made paid social work everywhere I've been, and I'm a big believer in it, partly because I was in at the ground floor back in the late 2000s when it was
Mm,
happening, and so I've just seen so many great success stories, and we could not make it work whatsoever. We were
mm,
blowing our budgets out trying to drive people in to do a trial. Like it was spending way too much money on our cost per trial, like we were thousands of percentages over what we were willing to spend. And it really just came down to we had the wrong people and partners that we were doing it, and they weren't focused on what we actually needed to drive. So when we got the team kind of restructured and then we did it, we just now it's one of our top performing channels. So it's one of those things where it's like if it's not working, you need to know when to cut bait,
yeah.
but it's also like, do you really have the right things in place, and are you doing it the right way too? So that's the other part that you just need to make sure you're mindful of.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I suppose it's not writing off a form of marketing because you tried it and it didn't work and you thought it would, but to really dig down into, all right, well, it hasn't worked, but I still feel like it should. And in
Yeah.
your example, you've obviously got, you got the history experience of going, this should be working, and now I can't figure out why. That's really interesting. And I suppose like I said at the top of this, I love the idea of this kind of David versus Goliath thing. You, if you've got a smaller budget, can you take on the big guys? Can you compete? Is it even worth trying?
Yeah, absolutely. You have to. I was this morning. I was listening to a podcast about with a 15-year Google person who is running their basically all their revenue side of the operations on search and AdWords and stuff. And he had started a new search company, and the question is to him, like, can you compete in search? And he's like, well, I have to remind you, but when before Google was Google, there were things like Yahoo dominated
Yeah.
search. And so you can always compete, and it's just like I say to my team, it's about we just need to be able to out strategize our competitors. And
Yeah.
so you need to understand your customer way more, because that if the other guys are lazy, or they're just used to big budgets, so they're not trying to be as nimble. You
Mm,
need to just kind of embrace that and make it part of your culture. And there's lots of ways to do it. I think, there's you can do it purely through messaging and advertising. Like I think an example I love is like Dollar Shave Club, where they just built, like they knew their audience, and they dialed in on a certain pain point. Dollar Shave Club is a monthly razor service. So they weren't the first. Harry's was around for years before them. They weren't the best because the quality wasn't that good if you look at any of the reviews, but they had the best marketing,
yeah.
and they just were able to dial into a pain point that,
Yeah.
like they're a US based company, but in North America, if you go to buy razors, you're kind of treated like a criminal. They're behind like plexiglass because they're a massively stolen item in a bunch of like drugstores or in grocery stores and stuff like that. So it was a horrible buying experience, and for their target audience, which was young men, it's like they didn't want to be treated like criminals, and they hated the buying experience. So just being able to tap into that of like, it's cheap and it's a better experience. Like, I'm bought in. It was a simple thing, all done through marketing. And they started, social and stuff, and then built into cheap TV inventory, and then they got sold for $1 billion to Unilever. So it definitely can be done.
Yeah.
Uh, and the other side is through your product or your experience that you're creating. So what are the viral components that you can build into your product or into your service that are going to get other people to refer you or talk about you? So what are the components that you're doing? So I love the double-sided marketplace space like Uber, Airbnb, and they over invested in all of these on their experiences in the beginning. Like when I first took an Uber, it was in the when they first started, and they were only in Manhattan doing and having black cars. And when I got in my first Uber, and there was like one, it was very hard to get a car service in Manhattan at a specific time of day. And then there was a water bottle in the car. And that to me was like, I'm not in a disgusting, stinky cab for 45 minutes going out to LaGuardia or JFK. And I'm in a lovely experience, and I didn't have to go and fight to get in this thing. So it's those like magic moments that you can create that drives that referral. So I was like a huge referrer of the
Yeah.
company, because I'm like, you got to do this. You can
Yeah.
actually like go and get a car in at 4 o'clock in Manhattan. It was amazing.
Yeah, and that's the thing as well. I think the experience there. So we kind of come full circle back to that. Making the virality and tapping into that referral network. If you do an amazing job for somebody and it's something very different to the rest of the market and solves that huge pain point, there's your marketing opportunity. There's your opportunity to get people kind of becoming raving fans of what it is you're doing and shouting about it from the rooftops. Your customers can be your best sales team,
Yeah.
at times, and you don't have to pay them, which is lovely.
Yeah.
They pay
Yeah.
you even better.
For sure.
Talking about going kind of back to how you measure things. So let's say you've had a campaign that people have seen out there in advertising or billboards or transit, whatever, and people have seen it going, oh, I loved that, it was brilliant, I thought it was amazing, but there've been no uptick in sales off the back of it. Do you class that as a success or not? And how do you measure how successful certain campaigns are? Because it's, again, we live in such a layered way of buying nowadays. People don't you don't get a catalog through the door that you ring up and you place an order for that product and you know where that's coming from. You might see an advert, look at it on Google, see a billboard, an algorithm sends it through your Alexa or whatever else. How do you track this stuff, and how much does that even matter?
Yeah. So first, I think you need to make sure you've got some like early warning, or not even warning, but just early indicators of how things are actually going. So first, I think if you do something and it doesn't drive sales, well, I know that my CFO and CEO would look at that as not being a success.
Yep,
Uh,
same
it,
here.
it's like, but there's always learning, right? Like
Yeah.
you take it, you pivot, you figure out what you got to do next. I think the main thing is to make sure that you're not like looking 3 months down the road after you spent your money, but you know that that whether it's like your website traffic, or if you're a company providing a trial like we do, it's like that you're getting your trial volume. If you're a company that's like sales driven, that you make sure that the folks coming in, that you're getting the leads that you need to get, that you're able to actually convert them into opportunities, and that there is like real pipeline that's being built, or real value, and knowing what's happening there. So I think it's making sure like it's not always a rear view mirror look, but you're getting those real time kind of that real time kind of understanding on what's going on. And I've always been um, a big proponent of getting into the tools and looking at things and seeing how things are going. So it's like whenever you're running these programs or campaigns, it's getting deep, getting really kind of into understanding what the data is telling you. So even if it's not working, like why is it not working? Is it, if you're buying ads on Facebook, is it because of that? Is it because of your keywords that you're buying on SEM? If you're at events, what are the objections that are happening, that are coming back? So it's like making sure you've got like a system or tools, or at least you're documenting stuff as you're going along, to make sure that you know why things may be successful, or may not be successful.
Yeah, definitely. Um, uh, I'm running out of points now, so I think we probably want to open this up to some
Yeah.
questions. If Francis, I'm conscious of time, so I
Well,
think Francisco probably wants to open up a few questions for us.
Yes, thank you. That was so insightful. It was really the really great conversation. We do have a bunch of questions in the
Great.
Q&A already queued. So I'm going to start with this one. If you aren't hitting your revenue goals, do you increase or decrease your marketing spend?
it's a good question. So I think I would say it all depends. So there's lots of different different revenue goals. So, you know, in our business, where we're selling like SaaS software to folks, we look at things like what's our average revenue per customer. So on a monthly basis, are they paying us £20 a month, or are they paying us £100 a month? And that's going to be different. So we're going to have a metric around there. We're going to have an overall revenue goal. We're going to have a user goal that we're trying to achieve. So one of those may be good, one of those may be down. So then it's a constant kind of mix of like what is actually happening between those different measurements. So if things are like, you know, your ARPU is great, but your user number is down, do we invest more because can we get more of those high value people, or do we want to drive scale through lots of low paying customers? So I think it always is going to be it depends, and it really understanding like, you know, how much can we spend in this market? Like, is there upside of spending more, or have we tapped out of the folks that we're getting? So I think in every instance, it's going to be like a bit of a moving target, but ultimately, like I always like to go down to like a gut feel and like use the data to tell you, can you keep growing, and should you be pushing in or which direction should you be pushing in?
Amazing. Okay, this may be a controversial one. Do you have any marketing tips you strongly believe in that goes against the usual quote unquote best practices?
Oh, that's a great question. I bet you've got some, Paul.
I'll start. Yeah. So I hate
Yeah.
awareness and influencers. But it's been ingrained in me. Like I'm a marketer who likes to drive results.
Yeah.
So a lot of times, like I'll get folks that whether they work for me or they're in the industry, and they're like, we need to build awareness. And so for me, like brand awareness or like awareness of your company is a wonderful thing, but it is not something that actually drives your business forward. That's a strategy to drive a goal, which is going to be revenue growth or user growth or some sort of target, business target. So you know, for me, one, I think that people need to get like super focused on making sure that, you know, in their business funnel, or how they're bringing people into their business and converting them into a customer, that they're focused there, as opposed to more kind of looser tactics that may not be directly tied to your business. My influencer comment was a little facetious, but it's just I've always been a little bit leery of the whole influencer economy, and I think we're going to continue to see that change as more platform announcements come out. But it's really like I think the core thing is like understanding the value of what you're putting your money into, and making sure that that's actually driving the results. I think the great thing that we have as marketers today is our negotiating power. And whenever I talk to anybody about any program, I'm like, I try to get their skin in the game on it. So when I was at the food startup and we talked to the food influencers, I'm like, great. I'm like, I will pay you for every customer that you load it onto my platform. And they're like, no, I am an influencer. I just influence people. I'm like, well, I want you to influence them to buy from me. That's why I want to give you money.
Yeah.
But they wouldn't do it. So they're like, no. You pay me for like spots and dots and impressions, but I'm like, no, but I want to pay you for customers. So I think that at all times, like, don't just accept the rules that the vendors or people are bringing to you. Try to like, everyone will negotiate now, and everyone will negotiate differently. So it's really an interesting market in terms of being a marketer and pushing folks.
Yeah, I agree with all that.
Yeah, very cool.
Amazing. All right, we'll give a minute or so. If anyone has any other questions, this is the time. Speak now, forever hold your peace.
I actually have a question for Paul.
Oh, go ahead.
Telesales, telemarketing. I hate getting called by telemarketers. It's one of the banes of my life. So my instinct is like, oh, that's so annoying. I'd never invest in that. But does it work?
Um, yes, it absolutely. I'm with you. I get no shortage of probably 10 calls a day
Yeah.
from various. They always just show up as like a random
Yeah.
uh, city, country, somewhere. I was getting calls from I can't remember where this morning, but they were somewhere actually in the UK. So it's super interesting. I think the era of the cold call
Yeah.
is obvious is dying for obvious reasons.
Mhm.
There has to be some sort of coordinated activity, but we've seen great results. I think the where things like the phone or telesales are great is once you can start to identify people who are either like perfectly in your buying audience or they've actually exhibited some sort of intent. So where we've seen great results, or where I've seen great results in my past, is like we would try to identify people as they hit our website, and you know whether you're just trying to get someone to fill a form or do whatever. We had tools that were like identifying people and then augmenting their data. There's some awesome tools out there that do this kind of stuff. So that we would match the prospect to a company and all of this kind of stuff, and then we would hit them. There was one time where I was looking at a piece of software for a business when I was working in the mattress category, and it was like a rewards platform, and I filled out a form, and I got called with I was still on the website. And so I'm like, yeah, like I'm like, I have to take the call from you guys because you're so responsive. And
You
so
know, also, you know what I'm looking at right now.
exactly. So it's that like I think there's like there's nothing better than being able to have a live conversation with someone, and so I think it's just like how do you use all the different tools that you could potentially use? Like chat's a great one
Yeah.
to be able to put on sites now. So whether it's that or like what like my the cleaner I use is on WhatsApp, and they always are like they do free delivery, so they're like, yeah, well, you know, we just finished cleaning your duvet, we're dropping it off, and so like everything's managed through there. So I think it's just finding the right kind of platforms that work.
Yeah.
Amazing. All right. Well, I wanna thank both of you for joining us, for sharing your insights and your stories. Like we said, we're really excited about the partnership with Mazuma. We know that this is probably the first of many things we'll do together. This webinar will be available on demand, so you may probably be watching this on demand right now. So feel free to continue coming to our website. We'll have more content for you. Check out our other webinars that we have. And with that, I want to thank you both again and wish everyone a wonderful evening, afternoon, morning, wherever you are in the world. And thanks for tuning in.